The sound of glass shattering still rings in my head. One second, Dad was laughing, bragging about his own real work. The next, the champagne glass slipped from his hand and burst into pieces on the airport floor. Everyone froze. Even the general stopped mid-sentence. That was the moment my father learned who I really was. But stories like this don't start at airports. They start at kitchen tables. A week earlier, I'd come home to our old house in Springfield, Ohio. The air smelled of motor oil and fried onions. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table cleaning his VFW cap like it was made of gold. On the wall behind him hung a faded photo of his factory crew, arms-crossed proud men who built America's machines before the jobs shipped overseas. "Back already," he said without looking up. "Just for the weekend," I told him. "I've got a flight Monday. Commercial or that hobby thing you do?" That hobby thing was my company. Morgan Aero Logistics wasn't huge, 2 light jets, 1 turboprop, but we kept medevac and defense contracts moving across the East Coast. I'd built it from nothing after leaving the Navy. But in Dad's eyes, if I wasn't wearing grease on my hands, it didn't count. He sighed. "You could have stayed home, learned real work. Tool and die never lies to you." "Neither do flight instruments," I said softly. He chuckled. "Those lie all the time. Pilots just don't notice till it's too late." Mom tried to smooth it over, setting down a plate of cornbread. Frank let her eat first. He kept going. "So, what's this flight? Ferrying some salesman to a convention?" I hesitated. A 4-star general, actually. Small hop to Norfolk for an inspection. That caught him. "General, you joking? Nope." He leaned back. "They hire civilians for that now. Guess they'll let anybody fly military brass these days." Mom gave me a look, don't bite. I smiled instead. "You and Mom should come see the takeoff. It's early, but you'll like the hangar." He waved me off. "I'll believe it when I see it. General's on your plane." That was Dad, half disbelief, half challenge. That night at the VFW hall, I watched him brag to his friends about my little flying gig. He didn't mean harm, he just couldn't picture the world I lived in. One of the men asked what I did. "She flies around," Dad said. "Still figuring it out." Laughter rippled. I smiled, but inside something old and sore twisted. My phone buzzed, a message from General Robert Ellison. "Appreciate your team's quick response last week in Baltimore. Looking forward to meeting the crew." Baltimore, the medevac storm run. We'd airlifted a child named Ruthie after flooding trapped her hospital wing. We beat the storm by minutes. That flight reminded me why I kept doing this. Dad saw the name on my phone. "General, huh? Sure." He took a sip of beer. "You always were good at telling stories." Later, when Mom walked me to the door, she whispered, "He loves you, Claire. He just can't say it right. All he knows is pride and hard work." I nodded. "Yeah, but sometimes pride's louder than love." Saturday morning came gray and cool. I stood at the small regional airport where I'd first learned to fly. The smell of jet fuel and fresh coffee filled the FBO lounge. My crew checked weather reports while I reviewed flight plans. I heard Dad's boots before I saw him. "So this is it, your big operation, morning to you too," I said, forcing a smile. Mom followed, carrying a thermos. We brought coffee. He looked around the hangar, our 2 jets polished silver, our logo freshly painted. Looks smaller than I imagined. I bit my tongue. He was nervous. He always covered nerves with sarcasm. Luis Ortega, my operations chief, came over. "Ma'am, fuel's topped off. Crew briefed. Thanks, Sergeant." Dad blinked. "Sergeant Air Force retired," Luis said proudly. "Best boss I've had since." The sound of car tires on gravel drew our attention. A black SUV rolled up. Out stepped General Robert Ellison, stoic, polite, his eyes taking in every detail like radar. Dad's posture stiffened. "That him, yep." Ellison walked over, hand extended. "Captain Morgan, good morning." Vice Admiral now, Luis teased quietly. I shot him a look. I introduced my parents. "General, this is Frank and Mary and Morgan." Dad shook the man's hand like testing a wrench. "Pleasure." Then, trying to fill silence, he said something that would echo later. "She's just a disappointment, you know, never stayed long in one thing. But she means well." He laughed, thinking it harmless. The general didn't laugh. His face didn't move. He only looked at me. I pretended to check my watch. "Pre-flight time. Please excuse me." As I walked toward the aircraft, the engines warming behind me, I felt the air change cooler, heavier. Words could bruise deeper than fists. But revenge wasn't my goal. I just wanted truth to speak for itself. And it would, soon. The next morning, the airport was wrapped in mist, gray and quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I arrived before sunrise, my flight jacket zipped up to my throat, coffee and hand checklist tucked under my arm. Inside the FBO lounge, the coffee machine hissed, the printer clicked out weather updates, and the smell of jet fuel drifted in through the automatic doors. Luis Ortega and the crew were already there, going over fuel calculations and confirming clearance for the Norfolk flight. "Morning, boss," Luis said, giving me that easy grin of his. "Winds are light, visibility 10 miles once the fog burns off." "Perfect," I said, setting down my clipboard. "Let's make it smooth." I wanted this flight to run flawlessly, not just because the passenger was a 4-star general, but because my parents were coming. It wasn't about showing off, it was about showing truth. At 6:12 a.m., the glass doors opened. My mother stepped in first, bright smile scarf tucked under her coat. My father followed, squinting at the jets outside the window. His old leather jacket looked out of place among the pressed uniforms and polished aluminum. "Morning," I greeted. Dad nodded. "Well, you weren't kidding, place is bigger than I thought." He meant it as a compliment, but the tone landed halfway between surprise and doubt. I led them toward the viewing area. The tarmac lights blinked through the fog like distant stars. Our jet a Cessna Citation with the Morgan Aero Logistics logo gleamed under floodlights. "Beautiful machine," Mom said softly. Dad grunted. "All computers, no soul." I smiled. Computers don't complain when you fly through thunderstorms. Luis walked up, headset around his neck. "Ma'am, the general's car just radioed in 5 minutes out." "Good," I said. "Let's run the pre-flight now." Dad followed me onto the tarmac, watching as I circled the aircraft. I checked the static ports, inspected the tires, verified the fuel caps, the pitot tubes, the trim tabs, routine but sacred. Luis read off items from the checklist while I confirmed. Left fuel tank secure, check. Hydraulic reservoir pressure, check. Exterior lights operational, check. Dad stood with his hands in his pockets, pretending not to be impressed. "All that for one short flight. All that so everyone makes it home," I said. He laughed under his breath. "You always were dramatic." I wanted to answer, but a black SUV rolled to a stop near the hangar. 2 Air Force escorts stepped out, followed by Jenner Robert Ellison. He was tall, weathered, silver hair, cropped close eyes, like a man who'd seen too much, and still carried it quietly. I walked up and saluted out of habit before shaking his hand. "Good morning, Captain Morgan," he said. "Or should I say Ms. Morgan, now still captain when it matters," I replied. He smiled faintly. "I heard you're the one who kept that Baltimore evac from turning into a disaster." "Lucky timing and a good crew, sir." Dad was standing only a few feet away, half listening. He didn't know who Ellison was, not yet. Mom offered the general coffee, ever the hostess. "Black 2 sugars, just black, thank you," Ellison said kindly. While I reviewed the passenger manifest with Louis, Dad struck up conversation with the man himself. "You in the military, too?" he asked casually. The general looked amused. "Still am." Dad nodded, oblivious. "Well, I tell you, these kids today always chasing fancy dreams. My daughter here's one of 'em. Smart girl, sure, but no grit. Can't stick to one thing, just a disappointment sometimes." The words dropped like a wrench onto concrete. Luis froze mid-sentence. I felt the back of my neck heat up, but I didn't turn. The general's expression didn't change. He just studied Dad quietly. "Is that so?" he said evenly. Dad shrugged. "No disrespect, she means well. But all this flying business, come on. It's not real work. Not like back in the day when men made things." I heard every syllable, though I kept my face neutral. I continued checking the logbook initialing entries. Each pen stroke steadied me. Ellison finally said, "Sir, you might be surprised what real work looks like these days." Dad chuckled, not catching the edge in his tone. "Maybe." Mom looked mortified. "Frank, that's enough." But he just waved her off. "Relax, I'm making conversation." Luis leaned toward me. "You okay, ma'am? I've heard worse," I murmured. Still, something in me shifted. Not anger, just a deep, quiet certainty. Let the truth show itself. I signed the last page of the pre-flight and handed the clipboard to Luis. "We're set. Pax boarding at 0700, he nodded. "Copy that." As I walked back toward the lounge, I saw the reflection of the jet in the glass doors. The fog was lifting sunlight cutting through in gold streaks. It reminded me of how things look clearer after turbulence. Inside, Mom sat stiffly, avoiding Dad's eyes. The general spoke softly to an aide, then turned toward me with a look that said he understood far more than he let on. When the boarding call came, the moment of reckoning was near. I still remember the sound of the cabin door sealing behind us, the soft hiss of pressure equalizing the click that meant no one could walk away anymore. The morning fog had burned off, leaving the tarmac bathed in pale sunlight. My jet gleamed like a mirror tail number reflecting across the pavement. Dad stood at the foot of the air stair looking like he'd wandered onto a movie set he didn't believe was real. Luis handed me the passenger manifest. "All clear, Captain," I nodded. "Let's board." The general walked ahead, calm and deliberate. His aide followed, carrying a small leather case. My parents came next, Mom nervous, Dad trying to hide his awe behind sarcasm. "Nice seats," he muttered, stepping into the cabin. "Smells expensive. Smells like maintenance done right," I said, fastening the galley latch. He ignored that and glanced toward the cockpit. "So who's the pilot that your boss up front?" I turned to him. "You're looking at her." He blinked. "You," I gave him a quick smile. "I keep the same boss I had in the Navy, me." For once, he didn't have a comeback. The interior lights cast everything in a warm amber glow. Cream leather seats, polished wood trim, soft hum of the auxiliary power unit. I briefed the passengers with my practiced calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Morgan Aero Logistics, Flight 31. Estimated flight time to Norfolk is 1 hour and 10 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep them fastened while seated." My voice didn't tremble, but my hands did just slightly. As I moved down the aisle, checking belts and securing loose bags, I caught the general studying me with quiet amusement. Then he turned to my father. "Mr. Morgan," he said politely, "your daughter runs one of the most dependable charter operations in this region. Saved us a week of logistics headaches." Dad laughed awkwardly. "You must be easy to impress." The general raised an eyebrow. "Not in my line of work." I stepped into the cockpit, closing the door behind me before anyone could see the flash of anger across my face. Luis was already buckled in the right seat, flipping through checklists. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Fine." He glanced at me. "You sure I've got a flight to run?" We started our pre-start sequence. The switches, the gauges, the rhythm, everything I could control, I did perfectly. "Clear right," I called. "Clear left," Luis confirmed. Engines spooled up with a low growl that built to a steady whine. The vibrations hummed through the yoke into my fingertips, steady, predictable, alive. "Taxi to runway 27, I told ground. Roger, Morgan." 31 cleared to taxi 27 via Alpha. I eased the throttles forward. The jet rolled smoothly, sunlight dancing off the hangars as we passed. In the cabin, Mom leaned toward Dad. "Isn't it beautiful?" He didn't answer. When we reached the hold short line, Tower cleared us for departure. "Wheels up," I said. Luis smiled. "Let's give them a ride they'll never forget." The jet surged forward, pressed us all into our seats, then lifted clean into the morning sky. Ohio fell away beneath us, fields, roads, the small factories that once fed Dad's pride. At 10,000 feet, I glanced back through the cockpit door window. The general was relaxed, reading. Mom was wide-eyed at the view. Dad sat rigid, staring at the clouds. Luis whispered, "You think he's starting to get it?" "Maybe," I said, "but some lessons need altitude." When we leveled off, I turned control over to Luis and went back to check on the passengers. It wasn't protocol, but I needed to breathe the same air as them. "Everything all right?" I asked. Mom smiled warmly. "Perfect, honey. You were made for this." The general looked up. "Smoothest takeoff I've had in months." "Thank you, sir." Then he said it, the line that broke the silence wide open. He looked straight at my father. "You mean, this is your daughter's aircraft?" The question hung there heavy and electric. Dad's face went blank. Her what?" The general's tone stayed gentle but firm. "This jet. Morgan Aero Logistics. She built it, owns it, and flies it. Impressive resume for someone you called a disappointment." My father didn't move. His fingers twitched around the stem of the champagne glass he'd insisted on pouring himself before takeoff. I could see the tremor in his hand. Then came the sound, the unmistakable crack of crystal slipping and hitting the cabin floor. The glass shattered into glittering fragments. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the steady hum of the engines. Everyone froze. Even the general didn't speak. I knelt down quietly, gathering the pieces into a napkin. "It's fine," I said softly. "Just a spill." But it wasn't fine. It was the sound of something breaking inside him, and maybe inside me too. As I stood, I caught his eyes. For the first time, I saw fear there, not of me, but of the truth he'd refused to see for years. The general nodded to me with quiet respect, then returned to his seat. I walked back to the cockpit, folded the napkin of shattered glass beside me, and stared out at the clouds. We were flying smooth, but everything underneath was shaking. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and a soft ping filled the cabin. From the cockpit, I could hear the gentle murmur of conversation behind me, my mother whispering something, the general's low voice, then silence again. Luis glanced over. "You want to check on them or let them cool? Let them sit with it," I said, keeping my eyes on the instruments. Outside, the sky opened in layers of blue and white. The morning haze had burned off completely. At 24,000 feet, the clouds looked like a frozen sea sunlight shimmering across them. Up here, truth had a way of echoing louder. My headset crackled. "Cleveland Center, Morgan 3-1 climb and maintain flight level 290. I keyed the mic. 3-1 climbing to 290. Luis handled the throttles while I monitored engine temps. The rhythm of call-outs, the checklist cadence, it all helped calm the noise in my head. Still, the image of Dad's face, shocked, pale eyes, hollowed by realization, kept flashing back. I didn't want to humiliate him. I just wanted him to see me, really see me. The general's question had done what years of words couldn't, and now I didn't know if that was mercy or cruelty. When we leveled off, Luis leaned back, half grinning. You should have seen his face when the general said that line. Priceless. I shook my head. It's not about that. He shrugged. Could have fooled me. I didn't answer. Instead, I stared at the autopilot panel, the heading, bug, altitude, hold, flight director needles perfectly aligned. So much control in front of me, and yet I couldn't steer the one thing that mattered most. "Do you ever think about your dad?" I asked quietly. Luis paused. "Every day. He died thinking I was wasting my life in the Air Force. When I came home, the house was gone. Bank took it. Did you ever forgive him?" I tried. "Forgiveness ain't a door you open once. It's one you keep from slamming shut." That line stayed with me. At 28,000 feet, the ride smoothed out completely. I stepped out of the cockpit for a quick walkthrough. Mom smiled as I passed. "Everything all right, honey?" "Perfect," I said. "How's Dad?" She lowered her voice. Quiet. Shocked, I think. Maybe embarrassed. I looked toward him. His hands were clasped. His gaze fixed out the window. The reflection of clouds danced in his eyes like waves, something old and proud breaking apart inside him. "Did you know?" I asked softly. Mom hesitated. "I knew you were doing well, but I didn't know this. You don't talk about it." "I learned that from him," I said. The general looked up from his folder, catching the exchange. "Ms. Morgan," he said, his tone crisp but kind. "Your company's been on my radar for a while. You've done more good work in 6 years than some divisions manage in decades." Dad stirred. You're serious," Ellison nodded. Her medevac team saved lives last month during the Baltimore floods, including a little girl named Ruthie. Dad blinked. Little girl," I met his eyes. "She's the reason I got that contract. She's why we keep flying." He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked back out the window. I sat down across the aisle, finally letting the tension ease out of my shoulders. "I didn't start this company to prove you wrong," I said quietly. "I just wanted to build something that mattered. You taught me precision, discipline, pride in the work. I took that into the sky." He didn't look at me, but his jaw tightened. "Didn't realize you remembered any of that. I remember everything I said." For a few minutes, the hum of the engines filled the silence between us, steady, forgiving, constant. Then turbulence hit light, but enough to jostle us. The autopilot adjusted wings, flexing gracefully through the bump. Mom gasped softly. "Just a pocket of rough air," I said, smiling. "Happens even on clear days." Dad gripped the armrest, knuckles white. "You're not even touching the controls." "It's flying itself," I said. "But I'm still here if it needs me." He studied me for a long moment. "Guess that's the difference between trusting a machine and trusting the person who built it, or the one who raised the person flying it," I said. That earned a faint smile, the first since we'd taken off. The general stood and walked toward us, bracing on the seatbacks. "We're ahead of schedule," he said. "Nice work, Captain." "Thank you, sir." He looked at Dad again, not unkindly. "Mr. Morgan, it's a rare thing to raise a daughter who serves without a uniform. Most of us never figure out how to do both." Dad swallowed, hard eyes glistening just enough for me to notice. "Guess I didn't figure much out at all." The general smiled. "Figuring it out isn't as important as showing up when it counts." He returned to his seat, leaving silence and altitude behind him. Back in the cockpit, Luis said softly, "He's thinking about everything he ever said to you." "I know. You're not gonna gloat, are you?" I shook my head. "No, I'm just letting the air do its job, thinner up here, harder to breathe, but cleaner." We descended through scattered clouds, sun breaking across the Chesapeake Bay. The shoreline shimmered like a promise waiting to be kept. For the first time that morning, my heart felt light. Because up here between earth and sky, the truth finally had nowhere left to hide. The wheels kissed the runway at Norfolk with a firm, steady thud. The reversers roared, then fell silent as we taxied toward the hangar. Morning haze shimmered off the asphalt, the sea air thick with salt. I caught Dad's reflection in the cabin window, still quiet, still processing. "Nice work," Captain Luis said. "Thanks," I replied softly. "Let's make this landing count for something." As the engines spooled down, I unbuckled and turned toward the passengers. "Welcome to Norfolk, ladies and gentlemen. Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a full stop." Mom applauded lightly, trying to break the tension. The general smiled at her gesture, his eyes flicking briefly toward Dad. "Flawless flight," he said. "Your daughter's reputation is well earned." Dad said nothing. When the door opened, the warm coastal air swept in. Luis set the stairs and saluted as the general disembarked. A few Navy maintenance officers were waiting nearby, clipboards in hand, wearing Flightline headsets. "Captain Morgan," one called out, "your donation of storm pods last month saved 2 crews from losing hydraulics in the floods. The base commander wants to thank you personally." The words hung in the humid air. Dad blinked, confused. "Donation," I nodded. "We had spare pods after the Baltimore job. I figured they'd do more good here than sitting in a warehouse." One of the mechanics, a grizzled chief with a southern drawl, extended a hand to me. "Ma'am, if you ever need hangar space, you got it. This base owes you." I shook his hand, grateful. Just doing my job. Behind me, Mom smiled through tears. Dad stared at the men, his lips parting like he wanted to say something but didn't have the words. Then came a voice I didn't expect. "Miss Morgan." I turned. A small girl stood near the hangar door, clutching her mother's hand. Curly brown hair, pink sneakers, oxygen tubing looped around her ears. It was Ruthie, the child we'd airlifted from the flooded hospital. Her mother stepped forward, eyes shining. "We heard you were coming. She's been drawing pictures of your plane every day since." My throat tightened. "Ruthie, you look stronger," she grinned. "I can walk now. Doctor says I can go home soon." Dad's head turned sharply toward me. "You flew her?" I nodded. "Baltimore Storm. She was our last evac before the roof collapsed." Ruthie reached into her backpack and handed me a crayon drawing a silver jet with a blue tail, and the words, "Thank you, pilot lady," scrawled in uneven letters. My vision blurred for a second. I knelt to her level. "You keep that courage, okay?" She nodded solemnly, like she understood everything adults forget. The general stood a few feet away, watching quietly. "That's the real medal, Ms. Morgan," he said. We walked into the hangar for a quick debrief. The general motioned for Dad to follow. On a folding table were printouts, maintenance forms, and a contract folder with my company's name on it. "Your daughter's work isn't just impressive. The general told my father it's building something this country needs: veteran training for aviation manufacturing." Dad blinked. Training. I took a deep breath. I started an apprenticeship program back in Ohio. Tool-making, composite repair, structural work. We hire veterans machinists, kids who can't afford college. I got the idea from watching you at the factory when I was little. He looked stunned. You did that, yeah? Every skill you taught me, measurement, precision, patience, it's the foundation of that program. He rubbed the back of his neck, his voice trembling. I thought all that was dying out. It's not dying, I said softly. It's evolving. The general closed the folder and offered a handshake to both of us. Mr. Morgan, your daughter's bridging generations. You should be proud. Dad hesitated, then took his hand. I thank you, sir. Outside sunlight poured across the tarmac, glinting off the hangar doors as they slid open. The smell of jet fuel and ocean wind mixed together a scent I'd always associated with purpose. As the general left for his meeting, he turned back once more. Captain Morgan, he said, don't lose that quiet strength. It commands more respect than shouting ever could. I nodded. Yes, sir. Then he looked at my father. You raised a leader. Sometimes leadership looks like defiance until the world catches up. Dad didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look on his face said everything, shock, regret, pride, all tangled together. After the official handshakes were done, Mom tugged his sleeve. You okay, Frank? He took a slow breath. Yeah, just thinking. We stood there for a moment, watching the ground crew push a plane into the hangar. Ruthie waved one last time from across the ramp before her mom led her away. Dad finally said, that little girl, she's walking because of you, because of a team I corrected. But yeah, we got her there. He swallowed hard. I was wrong. I didn't speak. He wasn't ready to say more, and I wasn't ready to hear it. But the wind shifted lighter, easier. Luis walked up beside me. Planes secure, boss. Good, let's grab lunch before we head back to Ohio. Dad looked at me, his eyes softer now. Can we stop by that shop of yours? The one with the apprentices, I smiled finally. I'd like that. The hangar door clanked fully open, sunlight flooding the floor like a benediction. Somewhere behind us, the echo of that shattered glass finally faded into peace. The sign outside the VFW hall flickered like an old neon heart, half of the welcome letters, dark the rest, buzzing faintly against the evening sky. A dozen pickup trucks were parked crookedly in the gravel lot, country music spilling from inside. We'd flown home that morning. I'd spent the afternoon doing paperwork at the hangar, but the real meeting I'd been avoiding came at dusk when Dad asked almost quietly, You still stop by the post sometimes. So there we were, walking through the same doors I'd entered 100 times as a kid. The air smelled of beer, Old Spice, and floor wax. Same photos on the wall, men in uniforms, proud smiles frozen in black and white. The jukebox played American Pie. A few of Dad's old friends looked up as we came in. One of them grinned. Frank, haven't seen you in a month of Sundays. Dad nodded, uneasy. Been busy. Then he motioned toward me. You all remember my daughter Claire. They greeted me warmly, but I could feel the questions in their eyes. Everyone in town had heard something about the jet story. News like that travels faster than wind in a small Ohio town. The bartender, a veteran named Hank, slid over 2 mugs of coffee. Heard you gave a 4-star a ride, Captain. I smiled. He was lighter than the luggage. Laughter rippled around the bar, easing the tension. Dad took a sip of coffee, then stared into it for a long moment. You know, he began, I used to bring her here after Little League. She'd sit right there coloring while we played cards. Hank grinned. She had that same serious face even then. I chuckled softly. Guess I was born for checklists. For a while it almost felt normal again. Then the quiet settled. The kind that asks for truth. Dad set his mug down carefully. Claire, he said, voice rough, I owe you an apology. I looked at him, waiting. He exhaled slowly. When the factory shut down, I felt like my whole life got scrapped. 30 years of work gone. The guys I trained scattered. I started to believe if a job didn't leave grease on your hands, it wasn't real. When you said you wanted to fly, I thought you were running from real life. Turns out you were running toward it. No one spoke. Even the jukebox seemed to quiet down. He rubbed his palms together nervously. Truth is, I was jealous. You found purpose when I couldn't. I reached over, touched his wrist lightly. You taught me what purpose looks like, Dad. Precision, patience, pride. You built things that lasted. I just took that and built upward. He laughed softly, voice cracking. Guess that's why you call it aircraft. The door opened behind us. To my surprise, Gender Ellison stepped in, no uniform this time, just a windbreaker and jeans. He'd been in town for a defense conference and heard we were at the VFW. Permission to join you two, he said, smiling. Always, I said. He ordered coffee, sat down beside Dad, and looked around the hall with quiet nostalgia. My father used to bring me to places like this. He said a nation's strength isn't in its speeches, it's in its coffee cups. That earned a few chuckles from the regulars. Dad eyed him curiously. General, you could drink coffee anywhere. Why here? Ellison stirred his cup slowly. Because here's where honor lives when nobody's watching. He turned toward Dad. Frank, you raised a woman who understands that. She didn't need to shout her worth, she just kept showing up. You'd be surprised how many officers I've seen who never learned that kind of humility. Dad looked down, ashamed. I wasn't exactly humble about her. The general shook his head gently. Humility isn't never being wrong, it's admitting when you are. Silence again, soft and human. Luis arrived a few minutes later, still in his maintenance jacket, carrying a box. Sorry to crash family night, he said, but I brought something. He opened the box and handed Dad a framed photo, the jet on the Norfolk tarmac, sunlight cutting across its fuselage. Beside it stood me, Mom, and the general. Someone had scrawled in silver marker, "Pride flies higher when it lets go." Dad's voice caught. You wrote that? Luis shook his head. Nope. Ruthie did. We mailed her a photo. That's her handwriting. I felt my throat tighten. She sent that yesterday, said to give it to the pilot lady's dad. Dad wiped his eyes quickly, pretending he had dust in them. Ellison leaned back. Seems the world's already forgiving us before we even ask for it. A few veterans came over curious about the photo. Hank tapped the glass. That your plane, Claire? I nodded. Ours, really. Built by every set of hands that refused to quit. Dad looked at me, then really looked. You know, maybe it's time I stop complaining about the world changing and start helping it change, right? I smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. We could use someone like you at the apprenticeship shop. The new recruits could learn a thing or two about metal that doesn't come from textbooks. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. If you'll have me, I grinned, always. The general raised his mug in a quiet toast. To fathers who learn, daughters who forgive, and the work that still keeps us honest. We clinked coffee cups, the sound soft but steady, like an echo of that shattered glass finally healing. As we stepped outside into the cool night, the stars over Ohio shone sharp and clean. The parking lot smelled faintly of dew and gasoline. Dad slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. You think I can still teach those kids anything? Are you kidding? I said. You built the machines that taught me. He chuckled, shaking his head. Guess I did at that. And for the first time in years, we walked side by side in silence, not as father and disappointment, but as two people finally meeting halfway between pride and forgiveness. 2 weeks later, the rhythmic hiss of air compressors filled the new Morgan Aerologistics workshop on the edge of town. Rows of veterans and apprentices stood at benches shaping composite panels, measuring tolerances, checking rivet lines with laser precision. Dad walked slowly down the line, his steps sure but humble. He wore safety glasses, a worn denim shirt, and a badge clipped to his chest that read, Frank Morgan, Master Machinist Emeritus. I followed a few paces behind, clipboard in hand. The sunlight through the high windows hit the aluminum sheets, scattering tiny reflections that looked almost like stars. Good work, Dad told a young apprentice, tightening a torque wrench. But listen to that click, it should sound clean, not forced. Try again. The kid did, nervous but eager. The wrench clicked perfectly this time. Dad grinned. There you go. Feels different when it's right, doesn't it? The kid nodded. Yes, sir. Don't call me sir, Dad said. Just Frank. I smiled quietly. It was the same man who once measured the world in thousandths of an inch, now measuring it in patience. At lunch, I joined him on the back steps overlooking the small airstrip behind the shop. Planes taxied in the distance, student pilots doing pattern work, a reminder that life keeps circling until we learn to land it right. He handed me a brown paper bag. Turkey sandwich. Extra mustard, just how you like it. I laughed. You remember that, but not my birthday. Hey, priorities. He smiled a bit sheepishly. We ate in comfortable silence. A warm breeze carried the smell of jet fuel and cut grass. For the first time I realized how peaceful the airfield felt when it wasn't proving anything. He cleared his throat. You know that glass I dropped? I nodded slowly. Hard to forget. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a smooth, clear paperweight with a single shard of that shattered champagne glass suspended inside. The inscription on the base read, "The day my pride broke so my heart could open." I felt my eyes sting. Dad? He shrugged. Didn't seem right to throw it away. Figured I'd turn it into something useful. I laughed softly. You even fix your mistakes like a machinist. He smiled. Guess that's how I'm built. Later that afternoon, Mom stopped by with cookies for the apprentices. She placed a framed photo on the shop wall, Dad at his old factory grease on his face, standing beside me in my Navy flight suit the day I first earned my wings. Below it a plaque read, "Do it right or don't do it." Frank Morgan. Dad rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. I didn't say that to be wise. Doesn't matter, I said. You said it because you believed it. He looked around the shop, the whirring drills, the chatter, the laughter, and sighed contentedly. Feels like the old days, only cleaner. Cleaner, I said, and maybe a little wiser. He chuckled, maybe so. A week later, the general visited for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The town mayor gave a short speech, local press snapped photos, and the apprentices stood in their work boots like proud soldiers. The general shook Dad's hand. Heard you're training the next generation. Dad smiled. Trying to. Turns out they teach me more than I teach them. The general turned to me. You did it, Captain. You turned pride into purpose. Couldn't have done it without him, I said, nodding toward Dad. The general looked at us both. That's how families win wars they never meant to fight. That evening, after everyone had gone, Dad and I sat in the hangar doorway watching the sunset melt over the horizon. The last light caught the planes on the ramp, their wings glowing gold. You know, he said I used to think pride was what kept a man standing tall, but now I figure it's love that keeps him from falling apart. I smiled, and sometimes it takes a little shatter to find that out. He nodded slowly. Yeah, sometimes. A small cargo plane took off in the distance, its engines fading into the quiet Ohio sky. I listened to the sound trail off until all that was left was the hum of crickets and the soft creak of the hangar doors in the wind. In the end, there was no big speech, no dramatic music, just peace, the kind that comes after the storm has finally passed. I thought of Ruthie, of Luis, of the general of the men at the VFW who nodded in quiet respect, of all the broken things that found a way to be whole again. I looked at Dad. We did all right, didn't we? He chuckled. Kid, we finally landed the damn plane. I laughed through tears, and somewhere deep inside the last echo of that shattering glass softened into something almost musical. Sometimes pride has to break for love to breathe. We all build things, machines, families, dreams. But the real work is learning how to fix them when they crack. If you've ever carried silence between you and someone you love, maybe it's time to let it fall just once and see what truth sounds like when it hits the floor. If this story touched you, share it with someone you miss. Subscribe for more stories of honor, family, and second chances, because it's never too late to land home again.